Hello, everyone, and greetings from Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Pierre Yared, Faculty Vice Dean for Executive Education, and I'm here today with Professor Bill Klepper for today's webinar on how to maximize the potential of diverse teams. Before I introduce Bill, I'd like to go over a few quick logistics. As you can see on this screen, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you. Moreover, please take the opportunity to follow us on LinkedIn for the latest news and updates by searching for Columbia Business School Executive Education. And finally, and most importantly, please do not hesitate to submit your questions using the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes of today's webinar. Let me tell you about Bill. Bill Klepper has been a consultant to numerous corporations, colleges, universities, school districts, and government agencies, and he has also served as an advisor to the Wounded Warrior Project. He has participated in the New York Stock Exchange Chairman and CEO Forum and the Financial Times Outstanding Directors Exchange. His areas of expertise are in executive learning, strategic leadership, and corporate governance. He is the creator of the Klepper leadership model, which has been updated as the integrated leadership model in his recent book, The CEO's Boss, Tough Love in the Boardroom, which was published in 2019. It's great to be with you all today. I'm going to leave the stage and rejoin you in the last 10 minutes. Bill, please take it away.
Thank you, Pierre. By the way, I'm trying to advance my screen now. Hopefully that'll advance here for you. The fact is that you can see on the screen that's up there, for some reason I'm having trouble with this one, the actual name of Klepper Leadership Model was published in a book called The Key Account Management. And of course, when I by a guy by the name of Noel Capon, one of our faculty members, but I upgraded it to basically be the I guess you might say the integrated leadership model. We thought about doing the Klepper integrated leadership model, but if you put that on a license plate, it reads KILM, Killam. So we stopped it. Anyway, with that being said, here's our program announcement for our program. What we hope to do is enable both the skills and tools needed to maximize the potential of diverse teams. And what we have, of course, all come to know is, and by the way, this is, I think, an emphasis has occurred in the beginning of this century, because the research that kind of alerted us to us, it started then, that actually you can increase productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness with diverse teams, but you got to understand them as best you can. So we're going to bring you to our campus. Here's our brand new business school. We'll be on the 10th floor of this building called the Kravis Building. You might know KKR fame, one of our big donors and graduates. So we'll be up on the 10th floor overlooking the Hudson Valley. By the way, my apartment is right to the left on the 16th floor on Riverside Drive. So I can just roll down the hill and be there on time. But we're looking forward to seeing you. So what do we know about these reality of diversity? Here was the original research that came out. And this is a little, what I would call discouraging, because when you first look at this graph and you look at the note that's there, it tells you, by the way, that despite their potential, most diverse teams don't perform as well as homogeneous teams. And again, this was research that first came out in 2000, so it's very dated. And so this got a lot of people thinking, okay, well, what's going on here? And then what they found out is, no, there was a smaller group of diverse teams that, if they were managed well, actually outperformed homogeneous teams. Well, that got me going about 20 years ago and say, okay, well, how do we manage teams well then? So what I started to do is think about that process of how you manage them well. Here's what the more recent research shows. And again, you might be aware of this, but if you're a team leader, which I'm sure you are if you're here, right? There are two things you need to understand that are very important in terms of your leadership of your diverse team. So basically, they are managed well. And that is, you got to feel your members have a sense of belonging. Right now, again, this is research recently published, and again, to go back and what you might recall in the past, Maslow's hierarchy of need told you, remember, it was the middle of it, started physiological, then went to safety, and then went to the idea of belonging, right? Well, what this research shows, we can go back to Maslow and learn that people have to feel a sense of belonging. So you as a leader have this in your control. You can be more inclusifying is the term being used here, if you can give a sense of belonging to the people that are on your team. The other thing too is you've got to recognize their uniqueness. Now, what we get in terms of uniqueness, that's the diversity issue, right? Let me be very specific. What I mean by that, what you're looking for in your teams is relevant to the issues you're facing. Okay. And what do we mean by that? So, you're there, you've got your issue, strategic issue. It's a problem, it's an opportunity. You're trying to either solve it or seize it. And there you are, and you surround yourself, right, with the people that have the experience, expertise, knowledge, and let me add this one, perspective. The perspective, basically, that is of your customer or communities you serve. So that's very important. And that gets into then the broad definition of what we mean by diversity, everything from age, I'm glad to bring that up, right? All the way down to the kinds of things we usually talk about in terms of gender, race, diversity, sexual orientation, et cetera. Think about the customer and the communities you serve, and then ask yourself, who should I have at the table with that perspective of those customers, of those communities I serve to help solve my strategic issue, whether it's a problem or an opportunity. Okay, now, so when you kind of step back out, I got a success model for you. Ready? All right. First thing is your technical expertise is table stakes. When you move into team leadership, it's your interpersonal skills. They're going to become more and more important. And it's not just your skills, but your understanding the behavior and appropriate responses to behavior of your followers, of others, all right? All that being said, of course, you now are in a situation where you can be successful, in this whole process. So kind of keep that in mind, that we're kind of focusing on interpersonal skills. Now, I have a formula for you. If you remember nothing else from this webinar, here's what works. And it's a 4-part formula. I like to tell people, I was Jesuit educated, so it's a syllogism. We had to take logic. We all had minors in philosophy. And Aristotle had it right. First thing, it's very important for you as a team leader, you got to know yourself. You can't go much further until you know yourself. What is the way that I approach issues, problems, right? Because we all do that a little bit differently from each other. Let's say you know yourself. Now, here's where people go wrong a lot of times as team leaders. Do you control yourself, or are you imposing your particular need or view of the world on your followers, right? Now, we can get into authoritarian leadership versus egalitarian, talk about maybe the questions. But let's assume you do this. You know yourself, you control yourself, then you got to know others. And then, of course, I always say, so what's the logical syllogism? Know yourself, control yourself, know others. Somebody always yells up, well, control others. And I say, wouldn't you like? But that doesn't happen with teams. What you do is this, is you do something for them. So what you're trying to do with your team members, right? You're trying to bring forward their uniqueness, right? Their specific perspective, right? Expertise, experience, and knowledge to deal with your issues. Okay, now, where's all this come from? Again, I'm talking about behavioral science here. Goldman's done a lot of work on emotional intelligence. And by the way, he did initial work on EQ, right? Emotional intelligence. And he said, okay, look, to be emotionally intelligent, you got to be self-aware. So what part of our formula is that? Know thyself. By the way, you also need to be self-regulated. By the way, this is all the research earlier on emotional intelligence. What do we mean by that? Well, control yourself. Now you say, what's this motivation thing? All right. Well, I like to do a little bit of a preaching here and tell you, look, as a team leader, you have to be motivated. There's no way your followers are going to be motivated unless you yourself are motivated in addressing what affects your strategic issue, whether it's a problem, right? Whether it's an opportunity you're trying to seize, right? You have to be motivated. And so keep that one in mind as a starting point for your leadership of teams. Now, you might say, okay, this is good. I'm ready to go. No, you're not. Now we got to deal with what an effect is. I'm sorry. Let me go back here. We got to go to what is social intelligence. So we're moving from emotional intelligence to social intelligence. And here's what the research shows. You have to be empathetic. Now, what part of our formula is that? No others. You probably knew it as walk a mile in my shoes, right? But you have to understand your followers. What are their needs? What are the way they see the world? What are their particular, right, uniqueness that they can bring to the issue? You need to be aware of those things as a leader. And then, of course, social skills, which deals with what you're doing for them. So again, I'm bringing you into an area where your technical expertise is table stakes. What the added value you bring is your personal and social competence. Okay, now, a lot of people say, okay, what's the way to look at this? I like this one because back in the days when I was doing graduate study, there were two guys around, industrial psychologists, Merrill and Reed, that developed this social styles model. I've taken a little bit further, and this gets into my leadership model, which I'll show you, is, and you may recall these. By the way, you may know DISC, might know Myers-Briggs. We can talk about it. But the fact of the matter is they said, okay, look, there's certain individuals that are very driving. And what I need you to know is those driving styles are typically change of what I would call, in many ways, agents. All right. So they embrace change. They like to challenge the status quo. Then, of course, they got these expressives. Expressives, a lot like Bill, right? We're kind of visionary, right? We kind of like to look at the desired future state. Talk about that. So, okay, you need to change, right? You wouldn't bring somebody together to work on something unless you want to go from a current state to a desired future state. That's change. But you need to know what that future state is. You got to have a visionary on your team or others like that. Then, having said that, you need people, by the way, that they call, Merrill and Reed call amiable, is team leaders. These are people that are process. If drivers are more task, team leaders are more process oriented. And last but by no means least, you always need strategic leaders. And these are the analytical styles. And you might say, how did they get to be strategic and not us? Well, it's not you're either or. You're not one style. You're a mix of all of them. But you have a comfort zone that you work from. These individuals work from a comfort zone that's strategic. Why? Because they love to deep dive into data, right? To understand things before they move. Now, think about all these factors coming into play with regard to your approach to a problem or an opportunity that's strategic in your organization. So, okay, here you go. I'm shilling my book now. I'll do it. Here's the integrated, right? I left Klepper off because it reads kill 'em, leadership model. For those of you, by the way, if you look at the strategic challenge you're facing and you're bringing together a team, you need to understand it's not about you. It's about the organization. Where are they on the S curve, right? And typically, if it's a problem, you're down here in what we call the trough, right? The trough is, by the way, low success, early time efforts. What do you need? Well, you need your driving style. That's the behavior part of leading teams, right? Because you're responding to this as a challenge of the status quo. Drivers are very good at that. Let's assume, by the way, you can come out of that trough. By the way, there's an inflection point down there. See it down there at the bottom where you start to move up? Well, there's a lot of work on inflection points. But the fact of the matter is that it's a change of the curve. You're moving to be more successful. What do your followers need? What does your team need to work on? If you've challenged the way you're doing things now, you then need to move to experimenting yourself into the future. You're not going to make a quantum leap. Rarely do you see transformational change occur overnight. You experiment your way to the future, but to experiment your way to the future, you have to be inspired of what the future is. And that's where expressives come in. Then let's go. We need to get to work, right? You need to enable people to be part of this process. And it's not just your team, it's all the stakeholders affected by what you want to do. Okay, so there's that. Then, of course, having said that, I'm going to plug in my apologies here. Having said that, you then move, stay with me here. Okay, then you move to this idea of convergence, or you, for the most part, have a way you're doing things in the organization, but you always got to ask yourself, wait a minute, are we going to face another inflection point? And so what we tell leaders and team leaders specifically, always get your team ready. Always get your team ready for the inevitable. And that is what goes up, goes down. Because if you don't start a second wave at that inflection point, right, then the research shows this can happen to you. Okay, so there's that. Now, in this program that we're going to be a part of, we got a number of skills. I've given you the team success formula. I've introduced the idea of behavioral styles. All right. I've showed you the integrated leadership model. That's only 3 of 14 different skills and tools that we will engage in the process of this workshop together. So I just kind of list these for you because you might have some questions around some of these issues, and I'm sure you recognize them. But what I was trying to do, let me go back and summarize. The original research that started to come out with regard to teams, again, this is the beginning of this century, right? Said basically that homogeneous teams can be more productive than diverse teams. But if you can manage well a diverse team, in other words, make sure they feel a sense of belonging, make sure you acknowledge their uniqueness, right? Their diversity, right? And from a behavioral perspective, lead that, they can become actually more effective than homogeneous teams. And all the research, by the way, if you don't believe me, Google it, right? All the research coming out of all the renowned universities in the country, in the world, are showing this more and more to be the case. And the reason being is we have more data because our teams are more diverse than they were 22 years ago, right? We've finally understood it. Okay, so at this point, I realized that we have some time to have questions. Pierre, what do you think?
That sounds great to me, Bill. Thanks very much for your illuminating comments. We did get a few questions throughout in the Q&A, so let's use some of the time that we have left to address them.
Okay.
Let's kick it off with Claudia. Claudia asked the following question. How do you define diverse? In my experience, most people forget about age diversity. Can you speak to that?
No, can I speak to that? I can resemble it, Claudia. Yeah. As I tell people, I'm in my 4th quarter. Claudia, I just finished a program with one of our major custom clients, and this is in their public documents. So I'll just use it as a reference. And I think it's a very healthy perspective. They start out, by the way, with saying, we view diversity in the broadest sense, including age. That's the first thing they mention. Age, and they go to ethnicity, race, culture, gender, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, abilities, disabilities, religion, socioeconomic background, veteran status, thinking styles, life experiences, among other differences. Now I say, so it's basically the fullest expand of what we know as life, right? Life is very diverse, and this is what's presented. I try and narrow it down to this idea of you define diversity, and how are you best going to define it? Again, look outside in. Look at your customers. Look at the communities you serve, and ask yourself, what experiences, life's experiences, do you want in the room to help you? So table stakes would be things like experience, expertise, knowledge, but perspective is the added value of diversity, I believe. And again, look at your communities, look at your customers, and you'll get good insight as to the way we should be approaching diversity. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. We have our next question comes from Mary, and Mary is wondering about the following. Her question is, what are the greatest challenges in leading diverse teams, and what are the best ways to overcome them?
Yeah. Well, Claudia, you probably saw from that most current research that's coming out now, it's this idea of inclusifying. I think the biggest challenge that we as leaders to be able to maximize, right, the diverse talents we have in the room is to include them. So you get to the model, right, of belonging and uniqueness. So I think those are the 2 big issues that we should start with. In fact, it's interesting. A lot of people are now putting, we have the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay. People have flipped it around. And this one client I was telling you about has done just that. They start with inclusion as their first emphasis, then go to diversity, and then equity with regard to what they offer. But they say if we're going to get some traction on this issue, it's the inclusion piece. And it breaks down further to how am I doing as a team leader with regard to people feeling a sense of belonging and that their uniqueness, their diversity, right, is leveraged. I can go further on that, but for the most part, I'd say it's the biggest challenge because it's the biggest hurdle we have to get over as team leaders. Do we amass the kind of diversity that reflects, again, the customer, the communities we serve? Do we have it in the room, right? Are we letting them feel not only they have a sense of belonging in the team, but also that we not only respect but welcome that diverse talent they bring in perspective? Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. And we have an interesting one that just came in from Jan. And Jan is wondering, which personality tests do you recommend for building high performance teams?
Yeah. Well, of course, I gave you a hint on it. By the way, don't feel like this is gospel, because we know that all personality inventories are based on the same psychologist, right? It's a 4-letter word, by the way, just to give you a hint. That was Carl Jung, right? He was a student of Freud. I won't bore you with more than that. But if you look at the Myers-Briggs, which was one of the first, I guess you might say, outgrowths of his work in personality theory, or look at DISC. That's another one that a lot of people use: dominance, influence, steadiness, conscientiousness. I like the social styles. It's still based on Jung. It's still Murrow and Reed going back to my graduate years, but I've seen it used. For example, I do a lot of work with one of the top, in fact, number one, top 4 accounting firms in the world. And they use the social styles, but they've adjusted the labels to more appropriately fit what they think is the emphasis they need to have. So the answer is you can use any of them. I just happen to have chosen the one I've done my graduate work study and have applied it in my models.
We've got another interesting question that has come in from Leon. Leon asks the following: is an authoritarian leadership style approach sustainable?
Oh, wow. Okay, here we go. The answer is, I'm going to get most emphatic here. If your organization is in a constant state of crisis, then authoritarian leadership, I think, is your answer, right? If you want to, the old idea, win a war, put out a fire, right? If you're in crises, then have a command and control type of leader. However, if you believe, right, you want to engage your diverse teams in solving problems, right, in seizing opportunities, be aware of the fact that you need to be more egalitarian as opposed to authoritarian in your style. Now, it's in contrast, right? Egalitarian says, no, yeah, we have our ups and downs, but if you look at our trend line as an organization, we're moving, up. How do we keep that momentum going? So I'm a firm believer in egalitarian leadership versus authoritarian for teams. Again, you're in crisis all the time, put out a fire, win a war, you can lean towards command control. But I would also offer to you this, that what we know about egalitarian leadership and teams is it sustains inclusiveness and innovation in organization. So people feel more included, right? And more innovative in what they offer, as opposed to being wait for orders. So thank you for that, Lynn.
So
thank you for that
one. Bill, it's a bit like it's like the Winston Churchill theory of this, right? Because he was not reelected after World War II.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Good. We have some time maybe for one or for two more questions that we can ask. I have one here from Stephen that asks the following. How does the concept of psychological safety factor into your leadership model?
Good. Well, let me take you back to Maslow. It's just the base, right? Remember I told you Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the middle one is belonging. By the way, there was a researcher that followed Maslow by the name of Herzberg. And he basically said, let me just explain something to you, that belonging is kind of the starting point between hygiene and what they call motivator needs. The motivator needs are belonging, esteem needs, self-actualization. The hygiene needs are that physiological, all right? Then we go to safety, all right? Then we go to belonging. So they overlap at belonging. But to your point, where's psychological safety? Well, Maslow told us it's a hygiene need. If you don't provide for, and let me define it for you, for the ability of your team members, right? I call them followers because you're a leader, right? Got to have followers if you're a leader, all right? If you don't allow for them to experiment their way into the future, remember I showed you that on the graph, right? Because you're going to learn as you go. So one of the measurements of psychological safety is we can do that. We're allowed to experiment, right? We're not told that you got to have the answer right the first time. And if you do or don't, it's an up or down for your career. So the idea of psychological safety is key, not only in terms of Maslow's hygiene needs, but it's also absolutely critical if you want to move your team forward in terms of their sense of, okay, I'm on your team. Let's go for it. So it moves you into that level of what I call motivating. If you don't provide safety, you will not motivate your followers to higher levels of performance.
Thanks.
That's
Bill. We have time for our last question, which comes in from Merrick. And Merrick is asking the following. Can you explain the difference between well-managed homogeneous teams versus well-managed diverse teams?
Yeah. I always say the difference is in what comes out, right, as the output. In fact, I did this whole thing, right, of saying, okay, diversity, equity, inclusion, and how those things generally think in terms of diversity is an input, right? Whereas equity is kind of your culture, how are things with regard to the way you do things, and ultimately your inclusion is an output, right? That gives an output of results. So here's what I know, that more and more and more, that if our teams are going to be, I guess you might say, assigned strategic issues, whether they're problems or whether they're opportunities to seize, the more diversity is going to provide solutions to those, all right? Those teams that are not diverse are going to be limited in terms of the capability of addressing those. That's what the research is showing. As I said, it started out being an alert for us to say, look, if you don't manage these teams well, you're not going to get anything out of them. But if you do manage them well, you're probably going to be able to provide for better problem solving and innovation with diverse teams. I don't know if that helps, Merrick, but there it is.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks for all of your insights today. And thanks for a great presentation. We're looking forward to your upcoming program, Developing and Leading High Performance Teams. This takes place in person on our new Manhattanville campus that you see behind me. And it's taking place this June 6th through 8th in a few weeks. So be on the lookout for more information about this program in your email. And on behalf of Columbia Business School Executive Education, we'd like to thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, folks. Hope to see you in June.